and welcome to Getting to Know ACS with Tracy
and Jasmine.
So today we have special guest, Mr. Ronnie Bradley. He is our Family Advocacy Program Manager. So Ronnie, before we get started, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. You probably pick up a little bit of an accent. I'm from North Carolina, the mountains near the Tennessee border.
Okay.
Born and raised, so that accent stayed with me all these years of Navy life, and then spent the last 5 or 6 years prior to Fort Bliss in Quantico, Virginia.
Oh, okay.
And so we moved here last summer as a family, and excited to be here and the experiences here we're having now.
So this is quite different than Quantico, I'm sure.
It's very different, but in a good way.
It's just different.
Yes.
So today we're going to talk about child abuse. It's a serious subject.
Right.
So we're going to talk about child abuse because April is Child Abuse Awareness Month, along with the month of the military child as well. So what we want to talk about is just what are some signs of child abuse? What are some things that people can look for, and what really defines what child abuse and child neglect is. So if you want to go ahead and give us a little info. Sure.
I have quite a bit of info I can give on this. I like the question you ask about what is child abuse. I think, there are 4 types. First of all, you have physical, sexual, emotional, and neglect. And typically, most people pretty quick, we pick up real easy on the physical, emotional, sexual.
Right.
Neglect becomes the one that sometimes a little harder to recognize or intervene or realize that we need to help.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so that's the one I like to spend a lot of time. Usually when I do briefs, I like to ask the question, if you had to pick between those 4, which form of abuse causes the most deaths? And I usually let that sit for a minute.
Causes the most death?
Most deaths in children.
Oh, yes. Okay. Which one? What would you think, Jasmine?
I mean, I would say I didn't get it right the first time I did it either. It's okay.
Is it?
I would say emotional.
Emotional would cause the most
eventually.
deaths?
Well, right then and there though. Abuse.
Or just
I would
over
go with
time.
The physical for sure.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just right off the top of my head, I would think physical.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what most, go the emotional, physical, because, you think long-term, like you were doing, Jasmine.
Right.
Neglect is actually the one that causes the most deaths in children.
Oh.
And there's reasons for that, right? And the first is it's less likely to be responded to urgently. It's more likely to be assessed as low risk. And even multidisciplinary professionals like myself, law enforcement, CPS, we don't always recognize the signs or something I've worked really hard the past few years, especially working in family advocacy and domestic violence, child abuse, is how I phrase things, how I say things, because it matters.
Right.
So saying things like, it was only a couple minutes. If you've had children, leaving a 2-3-year-old for a couple minutes.
That could be an hour.
I remember my kids are teenagers now, a lot older, graduating high school, that type of setting now with our family. But when they were younger, when they got quiet, we were always worried about where were they? What are they doing? Right?
Exactly.
Because it didn't usually jive with what was going on at the time. Yeah. And so that's the same way now. So we tend to sometimes see it, or we think about our own experiences, things I've been guilty of saying, well, I did that when I grew up, so what's the big deal?
Right.
And not really think much about, we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot since, it's a long time ago.
Right.
We've learned a lot in the things, and not that my parents were bad parents or anything like that. We're not saying that. But we've learned a lot through just trial and error and time.
Right.
That some things are maybe not as safe for little children to be around or exposed to or do without parental supervision. So that's the one where we tend to try to do more educating on, trying to help families and caretakers see that and that concern. It's not a tell us when they're a bad parent either.
Right, exactly.
Things happen quickly with children. Mm-hmm. And so we're also not trying to do that. It's more about education and what can we do to prevent something, to help either prevent a really bad outcome of injury or possible death.
Right.
And that's really what we've learned the past a few years now with child abuse is neglect is the one that tends to go kind of under the radar and not be seen.
So when you talk about neglect, what are some types of neglect? Because, there's a wide range.
Yeah.
So what I might think is neglect someone else may not think is neglect. So what are some of the signs of neglect, or what would be categorized as neglect?
So I've got a list I'll read off for you, some of those. And then I'm actually going to focus on a couple at the end of the list that I think are important for today's conversation.
Sounds good.
To focus on more, because some of these are a little easier to go, yeah, we got it, right?
Right.
Medical supervision, safety, which we talked a little bit about already, but we'll circle back to that in a minute. Education, dental, nutrition.
Yes.
That's true.
Parental drug exposure, things like that the parents may struggle with. Shelter, home, so having a place to live or a safe place to live.
Right.
Hygiene, clothing. One that's missed, or we've honed in more lately also, is this nurture and affection. So showing love and attention to children. It's actually gotten a lot of attention the past couple of years with the pandemic,
right?
Because of the mask and children kind of learning those social cues and other things and getting that nurturance and attention and being able to see that. It's gotten a little more attention the past couple of years. And then the other is exposure to violent environments. So being in a home where domestic violence or those types of things are taking place is another really concern. So those last two are the two that I think are a little harder sometimes to see or recognize the impact that those may have on the children. And I like I said, like to talk a little bit about that. Nurturing obviously is important.
Right.
Making sure you spend that time. There's a really cool video. You can go online, YouTube. You can type in still face experiment.
Still face
experiment.
Okay.
And it'll pull up a video of an experiment where you'll see parents sitting there with their children. Most of them are younger, toddler age, and not quite able to fully verbally communicate.
Right.
And you see interactions happening with the parent where they're playing with each other, some fun times, usually playing the game, throw the toy on the ground and laugh about it because the parent has to pick it up, or they're making faces or funny noises.
Right.
And the parent's laughing and having a good time. And you'll hear them tell them in their ear, okay, we want you to spin around your chair. They're in chairs kind of like I'm in now, right? To spin around and become still face. So when you turn back and you start interacting with the kids, just stay still face. Don't interact. And you see it doesn't take long for the children to become agitated, to start doing all the behaviors that we as parents don't want our kids to do, throwing, biting, screaming, scratching, all those, because they were needing that attention.
So negative attention is better than no attention at all.
So then you see it pretty quick, the experiment. They don't let them stay too long in that way. So they turn back around, turn back, calm the child down, play, and you see the kid quickly goes back to that kind of happy, calm state again. So you see that need for some of that, and that's so it's a good one to go watch and kind of see and understand. There's lots more out there, but that's one I like to reference when I talk about it.
Okay.
The other, exposure to violent environments. The one thing I learned a few years ago now in doing this work is children that are exposed to domestic violence in the home are at higher risk of mental health issues and concerns than children who are the direct recipients of abuse. So if they were the recipients of that physical, sexual, emotional stuff, neglect we talk about, the children actually in a home where domestic violence is happening in that environment have higher outcomes later in life of mental health issues and concerns. And so that was something that really kind of stood out to me when we're talking about this neglect, types of neglect, and recognizing some of these things that you were asking about earlier and how we can help prevent this stuff.
Okay, because I find that interesting too with the whole being exposed, because it's almost like with emotional abuse, where they say that physical abuse, those wounds heal, but emotional abuse, you don't ever know if that's going to heal or not, because that's something that gets put into your psyche, And so one of the reasons, I guess, because of that, we're here. If there's a domestic violence situation and then they find out that children are in the home, then it automatically becomes that it has to be reported because the children are in the home.
Yes, it has to be reported for those reasons. And I do want to take a second.
Yes.
FAP tends to sometimes be a dirty word, or it does feel a little invasive, and because people are calling and they're asking questions, and I hope that those that are listening to us talk today understand that that's not really our role.
Right.
That's CPS, law enforcement. They're the investigative. They're the ones that have to figure out if there's something there more concerning. Our role is to help educate, teach, give tools to families, which we'll talk a little bit about here towards the end as we wrap up some of these things we're talking about, some of the ways we can do that.
Okay.
But I think that's something important to kind of point out too, is I always want to be careful, make sure people understand that we're here to help you, not, and sometimes unfortunately things do happen where there are consequences tied to that we can't undo. But typically that's not the case. Typically it's more about, hey, this thing happened. Let's help you. Let's get some education, some support around that situation to make things better moving forward. So those things you talked about, those outcomes don't happen, especially as we get older. As adults, this stuff impacts us too.
Right.
This kind of cycle that happens that we can, if we can intervene earlier and get some things in place, we can change, and there is hope. And that's I think that's the message that's important, is we can make a difference and change that stuff.
And I think one thing that you pointed out earlier was, how our parents, not saying our parents were bad or anything, but they treated us certain kind of ways. We got punished different than how our children got punished, and of course how their children are getting punished. So I think it comes down to, you do better when you know better. So I think as we have gone through, we're realizing, as a society, that these certain behaviors are not good on outcomes. Right. So like you were saying with FAP, our purpose is to help you know better, to give you those tools.
Yeah, to have more tools in the toolbox. In
that toolbox, so that we, it's like, well, what do I do with them? It's like, so.
And with our parents too, I feel like kids are now more educated today. For instance, my child is all about mental health. She's like, okay, well, what about this? Because this is not good for your mental health. And I'm like, how do you know that?
Right.
YouTube, right?
They have more access to things than we did.
So they can see like, hey, like when I have a stressful day and I maybe snap a little bit, as far as like, just go do your homework. She's like, well, you shouldn't yell at me because it hurts my feelings when whatever. And I'm just like, you can't say that to me. Like, what? And then I have to take a step back. And I'm just like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have yelled at you. And, seeing that apologizing is not bad. Like, apologizing to your child is not like weakness, I guess, right? Because I don't think we ever got that.
Yeah, you didn't apologize.
But now it's almost like, hey, I'm sorry that I lashed out. It was because, work was stressful or something.
And I think that goes to what you were saying about the nurturing portion, to where we can be more human with our kids. Yeah. Not to feel like, okay, if I apologize, then you're going to look at me as being a weak parent, and that you can get over on me, So
yeah, I think that's important. I think that being that example, there's still. You probably at some point you probably ask about that homework numerous times, right? As a father, I understand, and I think and we can still have that conversation. Well, here's maybe why that happened.
Right.
I do need. Yeah, you're right. I could probably respond a little different or find a better way. But also that's part of what we're talking about now is tools. Well, when we get to that point of feeling that, where we might respond in a way that might be negative or have some really negative consequences, depending on how we respond. Then we're able to have other tools, a way to manage that. I can share lots of stories. I'm sure we all can experience about those learning experiences or things like that. I think that's the key to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Recognizing that, but it's okay to do that. I do it all the time with my boys as they're older now. It's like, I got a little frustrated. Yes, I probably shouldn't have responded that way. And my wife will say all the time, you do this stuff for a living, but I'm the first one to open mouth and start right? Because we go back to those ways and we have emotions and other things that we always constantly are working on.
Right.
We're not always perfect, and that's okay.
Yeah. Right.
And I think that's the piece too, to recognize it's okay not to be perfect in every moment, but recognize maybe when it's a learning experience or we can teach and help. Especially if there's something I've struggled with and how I respond to certain things. Help my children respond hopefully a little better.
Right. And that's the importance of, if you find that you're struggling with certain things, I think what you were saying earlier about FAP, family advocacy, that's one of the things that we do is, we have those parenting classes. Mm-hmm. We have those communication classes. The anger class, so you can figure out what your triggers are, because maybe homework is a trigger for you because you got reprimanded for not doing your homework as a child, so that might be really important. But I think again, to let people know that we're here as helpers, right? We're not here to judge. It's a free judgment. We're not going to say, well, you shouldn't be doing that to your kids because maybe that's how you grew up and that's the only thing that you know. So, okay. So what else do you have for us?
So, and speaking on some of that, I think it's segued to two things we can talk about.
Okay.
One quickly I want to touch on, and Jazz, you kind of brought this up too with your daughter with more information, right? Mm-hmm. They have access to things and more information than I ever would have dreamed imaginable when I was there.
Exactly.
I mean, I could pull my phone out and we can do whatever and look at whatever we want to look at anytime. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of studies now around this as well as part of some of that neglect, abuse, child abuse, physical, emotional, and they found that this electronic distractions, gaming, however you want to term it, has led to increased child abuse and neglect. And so it's something else, too, to be aware of. Mm-hmm. One, how's that impacting us? I can tell you lots of stories where we think this little screen in front of us and I can see the child in front of me and everything's okay and safe. And we're not as aware as we think we are. Right. And things happen all the way to children having those things and certain issues or whatever coming from that we think as parents, they're not going to have access to or get. And so it's a wonderful blessing to have, but could also be something that we have to be mindful of. But we've seen it increase the past 10 years, especially with that gaming side of kind of the emotions tied to that. You get into your game, and bad outcomes where children needed some of that nurture or attention or whatever it was in those moments, and things happen. And so that's one we definitely are learning a lot more about. Right. Is we're always going to be behind the curve because technology is changing so fast and every day. And
once we get something figured out, it's something new.
So I think it's something we'll always be trying to catch up with. Right. But trying to be mindful of that, and even myself and how I'm using that or how that might be impacting me or my children. Right.
I think it's interesting too with that, how now you notice kids, 2 years old, how do we if they're crying, what do we do? Here, take the phone. Yeah. And then they start playing, where they can operate the tablets and the smartphones better than I can at my age, which I'm not going to say. Right. So, but how that becomes almost like a babysitter, that technology, and then you don't have that human interaction where kids aren't knowing, how to socialize with other people besides, on the phone. It's like we're sitting at the table and everybody's texting each other instead of talking. Yeah. So, it's like, okay, what's going on?
They don't even talk on the phone. They text. Call your friend. I'm texting them.
Yeah. I saw a documentary stating like how what they're building now is addicting, right? So looking at my daughter playing, let's say Roblox, I had noticed her behavior was going a little kind of rude, disrespectful. So I took it away, and it was almost like she was coming off a drug. Right. So then I kind of put that into perspective, because I've heard stories where people would be in the middle of a game and react almost violently
because
their child is being disruptive, I guess. Right. And it almost made sense, because if you think about a drug addict, if you take their drug, now they become violent. Right. And I'm like, is this the same thing? Because
it is, and I'm not too far off on the weeds, but it does impact the same parts of the brain, cause those same
like withdrawals,
dopamine reactions when they're playing the games. They get that kind of flood of feeling good or whatever it is. And so those things do happen. And I think that the balance for us now is recognizing that, everything's electronic now.
Right.
There's nothing my children do at schools that's paper anymore. Everything, they have computers.
They don't even know how to sign their name.
And so everything is electronic. So there's a balance between learning the world around us now with this electronics and being able to kind of unplug from that or do those other things we need as well. As adults as well as children, to be able to be healthy, for lack of a better word.
Right. Okay. So go on to your next. I just like that you're just going with the flow. So I don't have to do a whole lot.
So the other one that come to mind was we were talking about this. You're talking about different tools in parenting.
Right.
I grew up in a time where spanking was probably more prevalent or used more often.
Right.
And, that famous, I turned out just fine, right?
I know. It's like, it didn't hurt me.
And I'll say that, I knew when those times happened, I knew I'd done wrong.
I knew I was going to get it.
But we've also learned a lot over the years with that as well. So the one thing I try to make sure people are aware of, especially within this military DoD environment, is there certain things the DoD's labeled. There has to be some other pieces that go along with it, but they've labeled as acts of abuse. Right?
Okay.
One of those is spanking your children.
Right.
On top of their clothes with an open hand on the buttocks. Right. You start taking pants down, or you start using a spoon or a belt or other things, it starts to change some of that. And so I tell people, we're not telling people that they can't discipline their children.
Right.
What I will say is you need to be aware of the state you're in, because some states do have different laws.
And that's very important.
That.
Yes.
But the DoD calls it that, but there has to be what we call impact. There has to be some negative things come from that, some marks or really significant emotional fear,
right.
Things like that coming from the child before it becomes an issue. But because of how it's labeled that way, a lot of times we get the call, right? And usually it's little Johnny or Susie going to school and sharing some story of they don't use the word spank. It's usually something like whooped or beat
or something.
Some really scary sounding word that the teachers have to report also because they're mandated reporters, and it turns into something that feels really negative. It is one that we have lots of studies. The original study was done by Tulane a few years ago, and it's been replicated numerous times since then. But what they found was children that were spanked more than twice a month tended to be more defiant and demanding.
Okay.
They tend to have more tantrums more often. So they have more of those physical reactions to people and animals and other things. So all those things we don't want our children doing, the more often spanking was being used as a way of discipline, the more they saw those things happening. And then they have more mental health concerns.
Okay.
And then the other thing they found is a lot of times most of those children, if it was more than twice a month, right, that they found those children didn't have really a good understanding of why
they were getting
this thing was happening.
Okay.
Right. So we're not saying it's the situation for everybody,
right?
But I think it's important that we recognize and see some of that. And we have other things in our toolbox. I've seen outcomes where as children get old, they tend to get larger and want to fight back or push back or move around more.
Parent abuse.
And then all of a sudden you have things happening that you didn't intend to happen. We tend to, I got to swing a little harder with the belt now because I got to get their attention, or things we didn't intend, but now all of a sudden there are consequences.
Right.
And those things we don't want to happen. So it's adding to that toolbox. It's recognizing every child is different.
Right.
How I discipline my oldest versus my youngest look different because they care about different things and they respond differently. We have different conversations about that stuff. Right. And so recognizing that and having those different things in my toolbox. As I got older, when it came time for those spankings, it was, do it, get it over with, because I can move on. All right. My mom got pretty smart to that pretty quick and figured out some other ways,
right,
to handle that, because she was like, okay, yeah, we got to get you to understand. So it's part of learning that as well,
right,
and figuring that out.
So I think that one of the things that you mentioned was reporting. So I think it's important that people realize that here in Texas, everyone is a mandated reporter.
Yes.
That you're not.
Most states are that way.
Yeah. So,
children. Yes.
So it doesn't matter whether you're a teacher or childcare, because a lot of times people are under the impression that you have to be in some kind of caring position to be a mandated reporter. Yeah.
Whatever.
If you know about it. So I just want to throw this out there real quick. if someone suspects child abuse, then they can call the child abuse hotline number, which is 1-800-252-5400, or they can report it online at texasabusehotline.org. And with any of those situations, those scenarios, you can either report anonymously, where you don't give any information. But if you do that and you want to report more, then you're going to have to call back and make a whole nother, new report. Right. You can do it where you actually give them your name and stuff, even though you're still going to be, no one's going to know that you're the reporter. But that way, if the investigators have a question, they can call you. And if it comes down to someone needs to see the report, they will redact it and take your name out, all that identification. And you get a confirmation to show that you reported, because people can be prosecuted for not reporting child abuse. So, and it can be either a misdemeanor or a felony, depending on how bad that is. And I just want to say on the hotline, if you go on to the online and report, they say don't use that if it's a child under 5, or if they need immediate assistance within 24 hours, or if it's sexual abuse, then you need to call in on that. Okay. So that was some stuff that I wanted to make sure we put out there. So we could go on and on about this subject, because it's so, it's very important, and there's so many different layers to it. So, as we're coming close to the end, I just want to open it up to you, Ronnie, and for you to be able to tell us some things that you feel are important that we notice, throughout the month of April, but also period, just living our lives daily. Yeah.
I think that in closing and wrapping all this up, the ways we can help, one is
definitely
changing maybe our thought process from that misbehavior to stress behavior.
Oh, okay. I like that.
So typically when our children, something happens, they're responding in a way we don't like, we start to see it as a misbehavior versus maybe they're responding to some type of stress. Or part of that education piece is understanding the development of the children, and even as a parent, our development stages as well.
Right.
And recognizing that children up to certain ages can't think certain ways about things, or the way we may think about it, or they may only be able to feel that emotion. And some of the things we talked about today could be impacting some of their ability to do some of that, or even us as adults. Right. And so recognizing that and going, okay, is this misbehavior or stress behavior? And taking a minute and just kind of, all right, it's probably, most of the time, it's probably not a misbehavior. It is a stress behavior. They're responding to something in some way because it's something that they need, or emotionally they're having a hard time with. And maybe there's still a consequence. We don't remove consequences from things. That's not necessarily what we're talking about here. But how I respond to that's important and matters.
And sometimes I think when you say like stress behavior, I think it's important to understand too that our kids feed off of our energy. So if we come in and we're stressed out, and it's like, okay, I'm stressed, so whatever you're doing is going to stress me. So that's going to tick that child up even more too, because they're going to probably try and match our energy. So versus when we come in calm. So I think that's very important. I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Well, and it's okay to take that minute too. Right. You don't always have to. Obviously, there's some situations as a parent, you got to intervene quickly than others for safety reasons, either for the child or for a sibling or whatever.
Or the home.
The home. But you can intervene and still take a minute after that to decide how else you're going to respond in a healthier way. So, responding the right way, if I have a child that they can only really respond in that emotional way because they haven't developed that ability to think abstractly and really think through, think about, why'd you do that? Cause why? Cause I don't know. Right? Especially younger kids.
Sounds so familiar.
And it's because they don't have that ability yet, maybe to quite think through all that. And so we have to respond with, they're angry right now. So how do I help them? I see that. How do I help them calm down? And then later have a conversation about why that was wrong or whatever. Instead of in that moment trying to, same for us as adults. When in the world of ever, in the history of ever, someone using this term, you just need to calm down. Has it ever worked for us?
That just usually sends you over the top.
Higher, right? Like I'm going to overwatch this. Calm down.
Calm down.
So it's the same kind of concept, except we have the ability as adults to think through some of that and the consequences and a little more abstract than maybe a child does. So it's recognizing that, changing that approach, changing maybe how I say things or do that.
Yeah.
Building that what we call virtuous cycle. So realizing that maybe these things happened to me and I was in certain environments and things that this was the way it was, but I can change my response.
Right.
Because now as I change my response, it lessens the likelihood that's going to continue to be passed on.
Right.
Through my children and so on. And then protective factors, right? So what supportive community factors do I have? What parenting classes? You mentioned some of this. Do we have? We have all these classes to help us understand those behaviors,
right?
Help us understand how to respond. Maybe look at how I respond, understand myself. Maybe some of those things we talked about in myself. So it's parenting classes, new parent support program.
Yes,
is a huge piece of this. They're great for that newborn or actually pre-birth,
right? Exactly.
Preparing for the child up to that 3-year-old age range. And it doesn't mean they can't come in the home if you have older children in the home, but that's the ages they're going to work with you. And by doing that, there may be some carryover,
some residual effects over there,
others in the home as well, but also classes with us. As far as anger management, stress management for ourselves.
Right.
But also in some of those other parenting classes, what we call screen-free parenting.
Right.
If you've going through separation, divorce, transparenting is another big class that most people don't realize you have to take.
Right.
In Texas, if you're going through this process, we offer it for free. You can come and you can learn how to communicate with that partner in a way that can be positive for your children.
Right.
Because those are very stressful situations to have to go through.
Okay.
And so those are some of the things that come to mind in closing without going taking too much longer.
Yeah.
But those are the things I think that we can do. Really, that misbehavior versus stress behavior is the first question. I think stop and ask yourself.
Right.
And realize it's probably not misbehavior. It's probably stress.
Just
behavior.
stress
Something
behavior.
going on.
Yeah.
So how can I help? And then how can I address that their response is not okay
Right.
later?
And so with that being said, so like I said, this is April is the month of the military child, and it's also Child Abuse Awareness Month. So I know throughout the month, Family Advocacy will be doing different things, maybe having tables set up, information tables set up, and that type of thing. So they can actually just watch the Family Advocacy page, Facebook page, or the ACS Facebook page, and find out what's going to be going on throughout the month of April for child abuse awareness, just to get that awareness out there.
We'll have quite a few activities. The one big one I will put a plug in is April 30th.
Okay.
We will be at Freedom Crossing.
Okay.
And I think in front of the Texas Roadhouse, we'll have a couple tables and some giveaways and some information and just be out there for a couple hours, I think 10 to 12 that morning.
Okay.
So we're going to start plugging that now while we're talking.
Yes, that's what, yes.
But definitely come out, see us, call us if you have questions about anything we talked about or like more information.
Right. So again, we're Family Advocacy, like you said, it often gets that stigma attached to it, but anybody, and I think most people would agree, that take those classes, find out, you know what, I needed this. This is something that was really good and I didn't feel judged, and ended up with some good good skill sets and good tools that they can take moving forward. So
yes.
So thank you so much, Ronnie, for coming and visiting with us today. Very important subject, and like I said, you have so much information. We probably could go on and on about it. But before we close, I do have a question. I do have a question that I ask everyone before we close out. What is the one thing that brings you joy working here in the Family Advocacy Program?
Oh man, one thing.
Just
Pick
one.
I think you may have mentioned it there at the end. It's seeing those kind of aha moments. I know I've had them, but seeing others kind of have it and go, oh.
Yes.
And see those things do make a difference if we can change one little thing, that it will make our. Obviously, we're talking about kids here, as the children here, but I think as parents, it'll make my life so much better or happier, or I can go, oh, I got it now, and maybe not feel as much pressure that maybe I'm doing something wrong. Most of us aren't.
Right.
And when we're hard and critical on ourselves. So I think that's the piece I probably get the most out of, is sharing that information as people go, oh, so I'm okay. You're okay. You're okay. Right. It's usually not as bad or doom and gloom as maybe that word fat. When people talk about those things or scenarios, it's usually not as bad as that.
Yeah.
It's usually smaller things that we can help with, and it never gets to that part of it, and we don't have to feel that way because we realize that we're not the only ones feeling that way.
Exactly. You're not alone.
Or whatever. Right? Even us professionals have to take a step back, like I said, and take that breath and realize that, okay, I got this, or I can improve.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
I can do better.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. So thank you for joining us again. If you all need more information on anything that we talked about, again, if you suspect child abuse, of course, call the child abuse hotline numbers that we put up earlier, or go online. And if you have any questions, just call Family Advocacy. The number
915-56, is it 568? Yes, 568-9129.
Okay. So just give us a call at that, and we'll be more than happy to help you out and get you the assistance that you need. Yes. So with that being said, this is Getting to Know ACS with Tracy
and Jasmine. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
Bye.